All right, good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate you all taking time of your schedule here to participate in our webinar. Just a couple of things. Again, if you are on a speaker or if you're on a headset, if you can make sure that that's muted, that'd be great. As many of you know who've participated in these in the past, we send out a recording of this so you can use it at a later date internally. And keeping the background noise and everything to a minimum really helps keep the recording at a very high quality. Also, we'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so if you have any questions, feel free to type them at the bottom, and we can then answer those. If you have a more specific question and need more of more than a general answer on a topic, don't hesitate to email me, and we can then discuss that in more detail. Today's topic is going to be kind of a broad topic. It's going to be unprofessional conduct. This is intended to be the first of a series of webinars covering this topic because there's many different things that fall under what you would consider to be unprofessional conduct. And obviously a few of these are insubordination. Everybody kind of knows what that is. Harassment, both sexual and non-sexual harassment. Theft, and violations of professional standards or policies, and that's kind of along the lines of, we're kind of intending that to be along the lines of violations of medical practices, professional practices, stuff like that. Not necessarily theft, but things that would fall under a violation of a practice or an expectation that would be required of a certified person, a teacher, something like to that nature. And of course, there's the one that's really difficult, and that's unprofessional conduct while off the workplace, while off the job. So these are all kind of examples, excuse me, of unprofessional conduct that the unemployment office would look at, and they're all handled in somewhat of the same manner, but they all have different nuances, and that's why we're going to break them down later and kind of discuss them in their own separate webinars. But for the purposes of this, we're going to talk about the broad strokes. And you have two types of conduct issues, and you have either a pattern of ongoing conduct issues or you have a single event. And what we kind of look at the pattern is that no single event is egregious enough to warrant immediate dismissal. So it's more of a passive aggressive type of unprofessional conduct. It's annoying, it's impacting your workplace, but it's not enough that one event has occurred that you say enough is enough, we're going to have to dismiss you immediately. The unemployment office, when it's like this type of thing, there's a difficulty in separating what is a personality conflict and what is truly a willful and deliberate act on the part of the claimant. So progressive discipline is very important when you're talking about trying to prove a pattern of unprofessional conduct. It also might pertain to a type of unprofessional conduct like the person is a bookkeeper and they're making errors in the bookkeeping. No one event might be enough to discharge them, but there's a pattern going on here. There's missing funds, or there's just inconsistencies in the accounting practices. So you want to make sure that progressive discipline is part of this when you're dealing with a pattern. Remember, always when you're dealing with any type of misconduct issue, you are trying to prove willful and deliberate. That is the hardest part for any discharge issue, and that is proving that it's not an error in judgment, but a willful and deliberate act on the part of the claimant. So you always want to make sure that whenever you're writing up an individual, you are keeping in mind that you're trying to prove that their acts were willful and deliberate. So always avoid, avoid words such as unable or inability or whatever would imply that the claimant is not in control of their actions. There's always a business decision, I think it's fair to say, in this type of conduct issue. Is this person costing you more money than what the cost of the claim is? And we always help our clients acknowledge and analyze if this person is only a $3,000 unemployment claim, but they're costing you tens of thousands of dollars per month in mistakes. There might be a reason to go ahead, a financial reason that makes sense to let that person go and not fight the unemployment claim. And I think that is some part of the analysis that should always be taken into this type of decision, because, again, there's a finite amount of money that you can lose in the unemployment claim. There is not in the case of what they could cost you in lost business, lost revenue, et cetera, if they continue to conduct themselves in the manner that they are. And it might be that you just can't build the case. So that's something I think it's fair to say that you should always take into consideration when you're talking about this form of unprofessional conduct. Then, of course, there's the single event. And the single event is that one severe event that occurs that is so egregious that it warrants immediate dismissal. And in this particular case, progressive discipline may be absent. It may not have been in place. There may be some a pattern of passive-aggressive type of behavior that leads up to that single event, but oftentimes there is a situation where you've had an employee blow up, or there's a major event that is leading you to determine that that person needs to go right then and there. You must remember that a complete investigation is crucial, even more so than in the pattern issue on this type of event, because you're going to get one opportunity to prove misconduct here. And this is going to be your one and only opportunity to collect as much information as you possibly can in order to make sure that you cover all your bases to prove misconduct. Then finally, there's the off-the-job issues. Now, some of these are going to be pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, if an employee is sexually harassing or harassing another employee off the clock, that's pretty simple to prove, especially this day and age with the technology that we have available to us. But if, say, it's not that obvious, say it's something that the employee has done and that is of a criminal nature, for example, you got to show that it's job related. You have to show that there was an impact or harm to the company for this off-the-job incident that occurred. And these tend to be the most difficult to prove, but they're not insurmountable. There are ways that we can win these unemployment claims. We just have to make we may have to make a direct connection from their actions to how it may impact the company or the organization. If you're a school district and you have a teacher who's doing something of a criminal nature, well, that's a lot easier to draw that correlation, because everybody usually knows that that person is a school teacher. But if it's just another individual who has done something really silly and it's something that has caused concern in your organization, we might have to be creative in finding ways to connect the dots to how that's going to impact your company. So those are things that we want to talk about here in the next couple of slides. Your policies and expectations are very important, especially in the more passive forms of conduct issues. When it's the severe event and the individual is yelling and screaming at your supervisor, that's always covered under a policy. That's an easy one. Okay, your policy is going to cover that under a code of conduct or something like that. But for more passive forms of conduct issues, you're going to have to draw the attention in your progressive discipline to draw the attention of the claimant, the employee, to that specific policy or expectation you're violating. And you want to make sure that that when you are writing them up, you are clearly stating the policy or expectation that is being violated. Okay. Again, I go back to say there's accounting irregularities, and you are concerned that this person is not handling themselves in a professional manner. You would want to write them up and specifically identify the areas that they're violating. Okay. Again, this is going to help you build your case by by eliminating ambiguity, by clearly explaining to them what is expected of them or how they're violating the policy. And you also want to always avoid generalities, of course. Be specific. And being specific is going to run the gamut in all types of things, not only in the type of policy or standard that they're violating, but also what is their behavior? Why is their behavior violating that policy? You want to take it that one step further and explain what it is that they're doing that is in violation of your expectations. If it's an unwritten policy or standard, because we all know that we can't possibly have a policy that covers every type of conduct issue. If it's something that's unwritten, you want to make sure that you clearly identify in the written warning what it is that is expected of them going forward, okay? Because not a written policy cannot encompass every form of problem that we may run across. And you want to make sure that you clearly explain to that to the employee what is going to be the expectation going forward. Patience is an ally, and that's kind of along the same type of this passive issue that we've been talking about, because progressive discipline assists in proving a pattern of unprofessional conduct. It buys you time. It is an opportunity for you to also eliminate excuses that the employee is going to use. If you're dealing with an individual where it's not so egregious that you can discharge them immediately, you have to build your case, just like in a performance issue. So if there are, say this employee is having issues with other employees, but it's not profanity, there's no severity in the confrontation, it's just that he or she is constantly not getting along in the workplace, you need to be patient. You need to drill this down and build your case, because obviously the old adage where there's smoke there's fire applies to this type of thing, but you got to root out the problem, and you got to constantly build that case in pointing out that this is the individual who consistently has the problem, not the other employees. It's her who's always the constant when there's a confrontation in the workplace. And so it helps eliminate all these excuses, especially if you can show that the issues are with different employees, with different departments, with different topics, whatever it might be. It's going to put the onus back on her or him, and the fact that they are the ones who are the root of the problem. And remember, you're always trying to build the case that the conduct is willful. It's not unintentional. The first time they have a conflict of personality with an employee, that might be an unintentional event. But the second, third, and fourth time that they start having this personality conflict, that begins to build your case towards willfulness, because they are now aware that they have a problem with this employee or with this department, whatever it might be. You need to make sure that you point out to them that they are the constant issue. That's the constant element that's in the issue. That you want to point out that, because it points to the fact that this is willful behavior, not unintentional. They know they have a problem, but they're not doing anything that they can control to resolve and avoid the confrontations going forward. Stick with issues you can prove. Okay, this is probably the single most common mistake we see, is that there is an urge to assume and extrapolate the problem beyond what you can prove. And the perfect example of this, I just threw one in here, is that you have missing cash. Say you have a manager who counts down the safe that night and the cash comes up $300 short, okay? For those of us who've been in retail and food service like I have been, when it's an even number, it usually means somebody's pocketed money, right? But that doesn't mean that just because the cash is missing means that they're guilty of theft. You got to keep it to what you can prove and make a decision. Are you going to reprimand them and build your case towards proving that they were the one who stole the money? Or are you going to immediately discharge them for violating your cash handling policies. There's a decision process here that you have to make, but unfounded assumptions weaken your case, especially at the unemployment hearing. I've been in many hearings where the assumption was that they did X, Y, Z, but we can't prove it. And all that ends up doing is it ends up clouding it muddies up the water, it clouds the issue, and it distracts from what you can actually prove. The winning issue you may already have in your hand. That is, they violated your cash handling policy and they didn't secure $300. Okay. So make sure you always keep that in mind. You deal with what you can actually prove. Without any doubt, a constant theme in all our webinars is always, always, always document. You cannot shortchange your documentation. You still have to prove willful and deliberate. And I've been through many unemployment hearings and many unemployment claims where we thought that the issue was a slam dunk, even with good documentation, and we're surprised by the determination. So, you know, we can't control what the referee or what the examiner interprets the events to be, but documentation is going to help you minimize the chances that somebody's going to go the opposite way of what you think should be the ruling. Of course, documents that we're always looking for in no particular order, but investigative notes, these are very important. Accounting records, witness statements. Now, witness statements are problematic at times because sometimes you want to protect the anonymity of the person who gave you the witness statement. We can redact and submit those as evidence. Just keep in mind that they're not going to be given the weight that they deserve if that person doesn't have their name on it or that person doesn't actually testify. But witness statements can be a very important aspect of that. Progressive discipline, of course, your written warnings are very important. Trainer certification documents might come into play if it's a licensing issue or if it's a Department of Transportation issue, all kinds of different things. We might ask you to provide us with that information to show again that the claimant was aware of what it is that they violated. If they have to go through a certification process or licensing process, that helps because they had to engage in the process and they were told at the time that they recertified or relicensed that this is something that they had to comply with. So those are very valuable documents at times. Of course, video. Video is a big one now because the video is so easily accessible now and the camera systems are so good. We are submitting more and more video than we ever have because just we just have more accessible to us. And then another big one that we've used a lot lately is social media posts. Social media posts have become ever increasingly more important in proving conduct issues, especially conduct issues that are occurring off the job. The state is now looking at that, and of course there's some legal conversation about that too. We will see how that all shakes out, but right now most states are looking at if an employee admits something on an open social media post and they have friends who are or managers who are friends on those posts, then that's fair game. So that is something that we want to alert you to, that might be an option to help prove a type of misconduct that's especially if it's off the job. It's better to have too much than not enough. Remember, and a lot of times, especially if it's a one-time incident, you're getting one chance at getting it right. So you want to make sure that overkill might be the buzzword here. But it's a lot easier to over-collect information and then decide not to use something than it is to not collect it at all and then try to recreate it 6 months down the road. And that's even more important than beyond the unemployment claim, as you all know. That might be something you have to prove in a more of a court of law type of setting down the road in an EEOC claim or something like that. But again, always be specific. Avoid generalities. Avoid assumptions. One of the things I like to tell people when we're preparing for hearings in a conduct issue, especially if it's like insubordination or workplace threats, whatever it might be, is don't just say they threatened the manager or they were insubordinate to the manager. Document what it is that they were saying, how they were saying it, what was their body language, how close were they to the manager, who else saw it. Try to include all this into the documentation process, because again, 4 or 5 months later, you might be trying to explain this to an individual who wasn't there, and you're trying to paint the picture why it was so egregious. And if you include that information up front at the time of the document, it only adds to the credibility, because you're creating that document and you're adding that flavor to the incident at the moment that it occurred, immediately following it, not 6 months down the road, and you're not adding it. It's being created at that moment. And always make sure that you include, if it's profanity, for example, be verbatim. Okay, everybody who's been involved in this has heard this. Okay, you're not going to shock anybody. But again, there's a tendency by the examiner that if you use the abbreviation for the fire truck word, they're going to say, well, he or she didn't use the whole word. They just used the abbreviation. Now that doesn't make it necessarily less egregious, but if you quote the exact saying, it removes any ambiguity. Okay, so make sure that you always be specific.
What time did you say?
Going to open it up to questions. Everybody kind of knows who we are, I think. And here's my contact information. And Susan, we will be following up with a copy of the presentation. We can get you a copy of the slides as well. That's not a problem. And like I said, what we're going to do in the next couple of months, we're going to take these broader topics, and we're going to try to break them down into more specific, what is the state looking for type of thing, so you can then kind of expand it beyond what this broad topic, broad brush strokes were meant to be. So are there any other questions about the content today and what we've covered? All right. Well, if there's no questions, that's my contact information. Feel free to email me if you have any questions, and we'll be talking to you at the end of May. Thanks a lot. End of April. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.